Hello, this is Angie Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical. I have been so filled with loneliness and grief and sadness and anger and frustration and the missing of humans. I think we all have. This year I had planned on doing Vision Quest. Vision Quest is a personal spiritual journey, and I had planned it, and I had outlines and color coded things and what I'm going to accomplish and the people I was doing this with. I mean, organizing it, not doing it. I am a little type A. And then COVID hit, and I decided to put off my Vision Quest because I felt like I was already in a Vision Quest. This is a hermit year for me, working with the tarot, and it's been intense, not just for me, but for a lot of people. And to hold this like collective grief in the world of just, you know, so many losses. I mean, right now we're looking at 2,000 deaths a day in the United States. I heard on NPR, they said something like there's a death every minute here from COVID. It's hard to wrap your brain around. And then we're just alone. Some of us feel really alone in our families of origin, in the places that we are quarantined in. Sometimes we go home physically alone, sometimes it's emotionally. As a parent, it's sometimes hard because you're the one parenting. And when your support system isn't in person, you're not raising your children in a village anymore, it can be super lonely. I thought if I'm missing humans, and I talk to people all the time, I mean, I'm like a hyper communicator, y'all must be having a hard time too. So I really wanted to just talk today about my spiritual journey, which came out of loneliness and loss and grief. And I wanted to give you permission too to think about this time of year differently and our journeys differently. My spiritual journey was fun at times. I remember the first time I bought a tarot deck and how exciting that was, or first time I was at a channeling and somebody's voice changed and even their face changed, and hearing these messages from psychics and doing my first meditations in which I was like in another realm. I mean, it's incredible. But the real spiritual work that opened me, that broke me, that took me to the next place where my spirituality matured wasn't an awesome experience. I mean, yes, there was awesomeness, but it generally started out of darkness and grief and ugliness and death and loss. And this is the holiday time. Whether you're a pagan, you're celebrating Yule and the starting of the dark time or the middle of the dark time, or if you're a Christian, celebrating the birth of the Son of God, or if you're Jewish and talking about Hanukkah, and bringing light. I mean, that's a story of grief too. These are all things that feel disingenuous when we're in this time of like, it's the most wonderful time of the year. Excuse my horrible singing, but it's a really weird time if you're grieving and you're lonely. I really struggle with loneliness, if you can't tell, and that's one of those spiritual illnesses, I kind of think of it that way. That's just deep in your soul. And I worked through it, and I sometimes return to it, even in a group of people, but I work with it. Um, they say the cure to loneliness is solitude. And so I tried to move into that space, and I think that's what I'm doing today too. So for me, the grief season is the holiday season. I pretty much have lost every important person in my life during the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Um, in 1998, 2008. Oh my gosh, I'm giving myself a lot of time. 2008, my second daughter died. 38 weeks of pregnancy. She was stillborn. I was in labor. I want to put quotes around that because it looked like I was in labor. Then it stopped and I went home. And when I came back to the hospital 3 days later, she was dead. They've never found a reason. And you'll have to excuse me when I just say sometimes shit happens. I once made a list of every time that I thought, oh, this is the reason Lucia died. And you know what was on that list? Things like I ate a hoagie, I slept on my right side, I slept on my left side, I slept on my back, I slept on my belly. Literally could not have slept if I followed that list. I had a list that were pages long. I would write, whenever it popped in my head, I would just write it down in that notebook. And when I got to look at all of this, and my beautiful friend Danielle said to me, maybe this guilt is a way of controlling something that you can't control. And I had to really remind myself that I have no control. And sometimes life is random and frustrating, and it just feels like you're unlucky. I think that's that part of our brain that thinks the volcano gods are mad. We have to make sense of what's happening to us, the suffering that we're going through. What did I do? How could I have prevented it? Sometimes shit happens. There's so many excruciating details I could tell you about. I have an extensive library of grief writing if you're interested, but I really wanted to talk about grief. I really wanted to talk about the way that this community, the metaphysical community, the spiritual community, bypasses those hard things: loneliness, grief, fear, suffering. I have friends who have lost and then lost again and then lost again, all in a year. Why? There's an entire study in the philosophy of religion that's called it's God, why can't I remember what the word? It is about the philosophy of why bad things happen to good people. I'm going to remember it. That word. Theodicy is what it's called. It came. It actually came. Or the idea of why does God let bad things happen? It's made many of people an atheist, this idea. And for those of us who believe in God, we still have to wrestle with this. I happen to be of the belief that God is with us when bad things happen. God hasn't abandoned us. I feel like all of this that happens, and God is the support. And I think of God as all that is: Great Spirit, Father Sky, Mother Earth. That's not why I'm here. I'm not here to preach. Can you imagine a church of Angie? Ridiculous. I think when I look at the buzzwords of, shadow work right now, and there's lots of people doing shadow work, I don't think we talk enough about the fact that shadow work isn't a once and done thing. We live both shadow and light every single day. We're petty and we're assholes, and yeah, we do all kinds of things. Shadow work is not a buzzword. It isn't a thing we do. I work with a therapist for shadow work. I work in a lot of different ways on that. It's not something you can do overnight. You know, the thing I hate more than anything is this like manifestation stuff. And I mean, believe me, I love manifestation and positive thinking and abundance and blah, 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 blah. But, you know, I just think those words like bypass how hard one those concepts can be for some of us. For people with dysfunctional families, we were not told we deserve anything. You know, there were so many times when I could have had some help. I needed help, and my parents were, "You gotta learn a lesson," you know? And I know that sounds maybe spoiled bratty, but the truth is that, you know, maybe the lesson that I ended up learning is I can't rely on anybody. You know, gratitude isn't something that many of us were taught as children. We were taught to be thankful that someone fed us. You know, in my world, babies cry because they know inherently that they're worthy of being fed. They're worthy of being in dry diapers. They're worthy of being loved. They're worthy of being warm. The babies that stop crying are the babies that are neglected. And I think it's important to remember that. We're supposed to cry. We're supposed to cry out, "Help me." You know, the holidays are trying for people with dysfunctional families of origin, people that have been estranged from their families, children who are facing challenges, parents of children that face challenges, the widow, the widower, the bereaved parents, anyone who suffers from depression and anxiety. This is a horrible time for people with social anxiety. Anyone facing financial hardship now have all these pressures of giving and buying and being. It can really feel downright cruel to see all the happy, happy, joy, joy thrown in your face when you're going through that. And I love our spiritual community, but all that positive thinking and manifestation crap can be really spiritually bypassing. We do a great job of clarifying spiritual pathways for people and illuminating our soul's potential. But how many times have you heard shame thrown in there? Like people saying like, "Oh, if you don't change your life will change for you. You'll get fired if you don't quit that job." You know, a lot of people can't quit their job. We can't just take that leap of faith that we're going to do fine as a healer. I can tell you, I still struggle to get my book filled. Most of us do. When you have your own business, you worry about things like that. It's not an easy path to quit your jobby job that you go to for 40 hours a week and you're guaranteed a paycheck to start out a business by yourself, even in a group. That can sometimes be even worse because you have quotas you need to make and things like that. Luckily, I don't have any of that. But to be honest, I think our spiritual community is lousy at dealing with these hard emotions and lousy at responding to people. You know, I've had healers say, well, they're not going to have any enlightenment. They're going to be in that low vibration if they don't quit that job. That is such an asshole thing to say. We have hard emotions, grief, anger, anxiety, depression. We have financial hardships. We're not always in a place of privilege. Many of us don't have the financial means to just pick up and do whatever we want. And, the part, and I blame Louise Hay for this and her book, the Heal Your Life book. It's like she has literally created a physical, like an emotional reason for every physical thing that you might be suffering from. And those emotions get demonized. If you have an illness, if you have a setback, if you have unemployment, it's because you haven't dealt with something in your life. Fuck that. It's not true. You cannot control this virus raging through your body. You cannot control the virus raging through our society right now. You did not cause your own illness and suffering. But how are you going to deal with your illness and suffering? That's what we're here to do. Yes, I can't change it. It sucks. This is hard. I can't change the fact that my daughter died. No amount of positive and magical thinking is going to bring her back. But I can do something with it. I can let it be that seed, that kernel of compassion. I now understand what it's like to grieve. I understand what it's like when someone says, "How many children do you have?" and you do not know what to say. It's important to sit. It's important to validate someone who's suffering, that they're suffering. When my daughter died, everything about me changed. And I just allowed it to change. But a lot of people tried to shift me back into who I was to get me out of my ugliness. Some people said I should just stop writing about grief altogether. I lost friends who I think were only tolerating me to begin with, but nonetheless could not admit that it was my changing that they didn't like. It was my suffering in their face that they didn't like. Well-intentioned people would say stuff like, everything happens for a reason. What is the reason that your child lived and mine died? What kind of crazy God decided that I was a worse mother than you? Because and I can tell you this, if somebody responds to you that way, you've lost a child, you're never going to say that again. It's kind of like asking somebody when they're due. You're never going to ask somebody if they're pregnant again. Even if I think everything happens for a reason, we don't always have to say what we know or what we think. I think the worst thing that people would say to me after my daughter died was, "You have a living daughter. Be grateful. Be grateful." Which insinuated that I had no gratitude. And I have to tell you, when you lose a child and a child dies and you're the mom or dad, you definitely do not take for granted the children that you have living. It may be sometimes hard to parent, I have to tell you. It's quite hard. But you also realize how freaking hard it is to keep a child alive. What did I do? I don't know. Maybe I should wrap her in bubble wrap. I don't know. Grief and gratitude are not mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand. And the grieving know this, whether you had a 60-year marriage and your partner died and you're like, "I'm so grateful I had 60 years. I'm so grateful I had 38 weeks of Lucia in my belly. I developed a relationship with her." And if you're a parent, you know what that means. For me, grief is just another expression of super deep love. And that love is something that we can all relate to. So when I hear someone talking about the grief and the pain and the loneliness, I think they loved very deeply. After my daughter died, I had such a deep and newly profound sense of impermanence. I clung to my living daughter. I was so grateful and amazed at her. She just breathed so easily. She never forgot to breathe. When my normal grief was treated as unpalatable, I simultaneously knew those people didn't really feel that my grief was unpalatable. They were just unable to fix it. They were unable to sit with it because that pain was so acute, they couldn't imagine it. And they felt helpless and ineffectual, and my suffering reminded them that we have no control over this life. And the part of the New Age and metaphysical community that drives me crazy is this idea that we can control life. If we just do the right amount of candles and herbs and oils, that everything is in our control. Suffering does not elude any of us. And we're having a moment of collective suffering right now and collective grief. You know, some people say we sign up for our suffering in this life. And while, I sometimes believe that, I also don't believe it's helpful to tell someone who's suffering this. Remember, whether our suffering is self imposed or not, we're still in pain. And when we're in pain, we don't need to explain what pain is to someone who's in pain. We can just sit with them in their pain. We can walk hand in hand, not with pity, but with compassion. And we need to walk through it as humans. We're not Buddhas. The amazing triumph of the spirit and the human spiritual being is that despite our suffering, we get up every day. We manage to find deeply intertwined matrix of acceptance and wisdom through the suffering. I've read that they're thinking about adding the next part of the 5 levels of grief. And that 6th level will be to make meaning out of our grief. That's the final stage. These are the lessons of being a human. One thing I think when I think about grief and I think about suffering and I think about loneliness, I think about the amount of unsolicited advice I get and I've gotten over the years. And I can tell you as a healer, the only time I should be in the role of a teacher or a wise woman or a medicine woman is when I'm asked to be. Otherwise, I'm just an equal. I'm a compassionate listener. And, I've talked to Kira over the months of doing this podcast. Kira is a professional therapist, and we've talked about to get your degree or not, to be a professional or not. And I love that part of not being a professional, of the fact that we're just equals. I don't have to fix, I don't have to heal. I can just be compassionate. I can be another human being here. We can love without expectation. That's what holding space is. Just to listen, to hold space. When I hear teachers and healers maniacally trying to shift people out of difficult emotions or telling them how they're gonna make themselves sick or whatever, telling them, this truth of theirs is, the end all be all and they have to manifest quickly a new reality. I'm just like, shift them further into it. Don't try to heal. Go deeper. Ask better questions. Get curious. It's normal to feel immense grief and anger and depression and loneliness when we're in a pandemic or when we've lost someone. So I think Maybe the lesson I want to say right now is if you're lonely, go deeper. Go deeper into it. Push. I guess, what I want to say is we can give the gift of abiding this season without judgment. And one thing I decided this year was that I am not just going to buy gifts just to like give someone something because I'm not just walking around being inspired places. I'm at home like every decent human being should be. And the truth is that I don't want my friends who many of them are facing financial hardships because of the pandemic and losing jobs and having their clientele cut. I don't need anything material. But what I do want is to hold space, to tell them I love them and I care about them and I'm curious about them and I would love to sit with them and have a cup of tea. If we could sit together and have a cup of tea. So what I want to do is give the gift of abiding this year. And I would love to hear what you're going through. And if you feel called, you can leave a message on my Anchor page, or you can leave a voicemail and email it to me at Angie@themoonandstone.com. And just tell me, what are you struggling with? What are your thoughts this holiday season, this end of the year, beginning of the new year? What do you need help with? What are you curious about? What are your thoughts? Let's inspire each other. Let's do it without judgment. Let's let this be the foundation of spirit. Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie@themoonandstone.com.